Using just a screwdriver, I'm going to show you how to reset and adjust one of these types of carburetor. And if you'd like to see the full version of this video, then click through the link at the end of this video. Welcome to the Repair Specialist channel, because knowledge is power. So, let's get to it. So, here's the carburetor. And let's clarify, we have the main large adjuster screw here, which adjusts the fuel-air ratio to richen or lean out the fuel reaching the engine at high RPM. In other words, when the throttle is fully open. This is the low screw that adjusts the air-fuel mix at low or idling speed. Some of these screws have a cap covering them. Some are actually covered in a resin to prevent any adjustments, outside of a dealership maybe, that is. If you do feel that you need to adjust these, and you want to save time and money by adjusting it yourself, then I will now run through how I do this simply with a narrow flat screwdriver. And usually the high screw also has a flat screwdriver head, although these screws can vary from machine to machine with special torque heads that require special tools, all of which, by the way, can be found on Amazon. So I have this type of carburetor on my weed eater, and so we'll go ahead and start the engine and make the adjustments. We can note here that from the engine idling, if we turn the screw out anti-clockwise, then the engine will eventually sound like this. It becomes lumpy and struggles to idle. And from here, if we screw the idling screw inwards clockwise, then you'll see that the engine revs will start to increase, and increase more the more we turn it. If we've got a situation where the engine is idling like this, that's obviously not running at its best, because this sound is a symptom that the engine is running too lean. So screwing the screw anti-clockwise outwards raises the needle out of the main jet slightly. This allows more fuel out of the main jet, thus richening up the fuel-to-air mix at low revs. And so of course we adjust this screw slowly while we're listening to the engine, where the engine sounds like it's running much better. On the other hand, if the engine is idling like this, then this is a symptom of too much fuel reaching the engine at low revs. And so in this case we take the opposite stance. We screw the screw in slowly, lowering the needle into the jet, restricting some of that excess fuel coming out of the main jet, thus leaning out the fuel slightly so that the engine is receiving the right amount of fuel and therefore runs much better. Now, it's important to remember that we must not get this screw, which is the low speed screw, mixed up with the idling screw. This doesn't set the pace of the idling speed. This screw, the low screw, sets the air to fuel ratio mix going into the engine. The idling screw here operates the throttle. So when we feel that we've adjusted this low screw to a point where the engine seems to be running well, we can then put a further tweak onto the adjustments with the idling screw, either to speed up the low RPM slightly if it needs that, or to slow it down slightly if it needs that. Either way, we need to bring the idling RPM to a reasonable level. So this is the idling adjustment screw, and when the screw is screwed in, this increases the idling speed. When we screw this screw out anti-clockwise, the engine revs lower. On this weed eater strimmer, I need to bring the idling RPM to a point where the head of the strimmer is no longer turning, but not too low that it's going to stall. So I get that nice sweet spot after adjusting the low screw. So now we've adjusted the low screw, we'll go ahead and adjust the single adjuster screw for the high RPM. So with the engine running on maximum, I'll take a flat screwdriver to the single adjuster screw. And if I unscrew it anti-clockwise slowly, you'll hear the engine starting to change its tone. Screwing the screw out like this is delivering more fuel down into the main jet for the engine to use, and therefore there's a richer supply of fuel for the engine. more fuel than it can comfortably combust, and so it makes this sound, and the engine revs start to lower slightly. And if I carried on unscrewing this, the engine would most likely stop due to flooding too much fuel into the cylinder. And so if I start to screw it in again, we can see the engine revs start to raise again. And that's because it's reducing that large amount of fuel going into the cylinder, and the engine can combust this amount much better, and the engine does sound better. But if I keep turning it in the same direction, it's going to shut off too much of the fuel, and there won't be enough for efficient combustion. And so the engine revs will lower once again, and it will weaken the power of the engine. So what we're looking for is to screw the screw back and get that nice sweet spot between the two, just on the edge of being rich slightly. And that's because if it's just slightly on the edge of rich, not too much, just slightly, then we've got a good amount of fuel going in there with its accompanying oil to keep everything nice and lubricated.